I never expected the studio walls at my uncle's shoe workshop to echo with laughter at my expense. Even the brittle February air creeping in through the window cracks did little to numb my cheeks as they flushed, one shade redder with every mocking quip. In Rome, the old family way was to mold leather, not dreams, but that day I had dared unroll my sketches on the long, scar-topped work table. My hands shook slightly, though I tried to mask it by steadying my portfolio with both palms. "This one is a dress, yes," Aunt Margarita snorted, stabbing her finger at a pencil rendering of a woman in shell-pink taffeta, all curves and audacity. "Who will wear such a thing?" "Maybe the wives of the American movie men," Giulio, my cousin, cackled. He picked up another sketch, making a show of fanning himself as though scandalized. The other apprentices, boys I had known since childhood, snickered behind their hands. My father just watched. Sometimes he flicked his gaze from my hopeful eyes down to the papers and back, like he couldn't reconcile the two. Then quietly but with enough force to burn, he said, "You waste time pretending you are Parisian. Roma is not for costumes." I tried to explain. I talked about structure, about how a dress is architecture, how silk falls like a dome, how a suit is a city plan for the body. The words fell flat, my tongue felt thick. The laughter rolled on, punctuated by Sylvia's high, nervous giggle. She was the only one who had ever attended a real runway show back in the early 90s before her husband lost his job. Uncle Archero snorted, "Nice fantasy." But even at Carnival, people do not wear this. The important thing, Marco, is shoes. Learn the business. You know already that clothes, they're for rich people far away. No one noticed when I left. I swept my sketches into a folder, careful to keep the tears from landing on the delicate vellum. The street outside was empty, except for the burnt orange Vespa belonging to Tommaso, the youngest of the apprentices. He had never once spoken to me directly. I wandered the old neighborhoods, my hand pressed against the folder under my coat. Every rattling bus and dirt-caked Fiat seemed to mock me too. I kept replaying Giulio's smirk, my father's disappointment, the way my aunt had looked at me like I was a small child dreaming of flying. The Roman dusk washed the city in gold, but nothing could soften the ache inside. For days after, I didn't eat much or sleep well. I went to help in the workshop as usual but said little. Once I tried to ask my father what shoes had meant to him, why he loved the craft. He shrugged. "It is work, you learn it." "You provide," he answered, eyes on a curling strip of leather. Spring came, and with the wisteria a strange clarity. If my sketches were a joke, why did they haunt me so? I listened to every tiny sound as I lay awake at night, the neighbor's television, the bells from Santa Maria in Trastevere, my father's soft snores. My mind drew seams and silhouettes on the shadowed ceiling. The city outside hummed with ancient beauty, and somewhere in its bones, I decided, was a place for what I wanted to make. I left in the first week of May, slipping my sketches and some clothes into my mother's old sewing bag. She hugged me before dawn, her eyes bright but her arms trembling. "You could stay. We would help you open a little shop." "A shop to sell shoes," I whispered. She brushed the hair from my forehead. "Be brave, write postcards. If you need money, I find a way." I nodded, unable to promise I'd come back soon or that I wouldn't fail. I slept on the train to Milan, my bag pressed to my chest, only waking when the sun made glare on the cloudy window. In Milan, where fashion was a temple, I expected everything to change. At first, it didn't. The city was sharper than old Rome, faster, less forgiving. Runway shows were guarded fortresses, ateliers closed tight. I worked in a bakery to afford a single room with a window too high to see out of. I sent out portfolios by post, haunted the steps of design schools, and pestered the tailors along Via della Spiga. Most didn't look at my sketches for more than 10 seconds. One man shoved my folder back into my hands, muttering that I'd be lucky to make costumes for a children's play. It hurt each time, but the pain was duller than the wound I'd gotten at home, and after a few months I learned to use even the refusals. Each "no, Gracie" was a chance to find what was wrong, to trim ideas, to redraw lines, to rethink. The city bled my savings quickly. By September, all I could afford was rice, black coffee, and the occasional orange on Sundays, but my lines improved. I worked faster with more intent. In the evenings, as the city's neon signs flickered on, I practiced sewing with scraps I bought from the market. Silk, even the smallest bit, was precious. Wool, with its quiet weight, became my friend. Eventually, a letter arrived, handwritten, elegant, inviting me for an interview at a boutique near the Duomo. I wore my one good shirt, the sleeves too short, and waited in the shop while a dozen other hopefuls paraded through. I was too quiet perhaps, but Rosa, the owner, liked my sketches, especially a coal blue evening jacket, all sharp lines and defiant restraint. Who taught you to sew like this? She asked. My mother, I said, and for the first time in a year I nearly smiled when I thought of home. Rosa hired me as an assistant. At first I only fetched coffee and swept up pins. But she let me stay late, watching as she draped linen over mannequins, critiquing my sewing with a kindness I was starved for. You know how to build, she told me one night as the city outside thundered with spring rain. Now learn to destroy too, let's break a few rules. With her I made mistakes and learned from them. We sourced fabric from hidden warehouses, piecing together gowns from remnants no one else wanted. Within 2 years, Rosa sent my name in as a junior designer for a fashion show, a small one but televised nonetheless. The night of the first runway, my hands shook so much I nearly stabbed myself threading a needle. But when the lights went up and I saw my suit, a crimson wool number sharp as heartbreak, strutting down the runway on a model taller than any man I had known, something inside shifted. The applause was soft, scattered, but real. From there, offers came slowly at first. Reviews, some tactful, some brutal. I worked for others, a stern German atelier, a wild-eyed Parisian who flung fabric like paint. Each place taught me something new, how to choose a lining, how to argue for a vision, when to let go. Years passed. My name appeared beneath magazine spreads, my designs in a handful of boutiques in Milan and Venice. I even had an article about emerging talent written in a language my uncle would never read, but the grief didn't leave entirely. There were nights when I'd close the studio and walk to a quiet piazza, the air thick with frying garlic and tobacco, and remember the faces of my father and cousins, crowded around the workshop table. Their laughter still echoed, but now it mingled with applause. My return came quicker than I'd planned. A letter from my mother, shakier this time, begged me to come back for my father's 60th birthday. I packed carefully, a new leather carryall, a suit of my own making, and a dress in the blue I always associated with Rome's dusk. Rome felt smaller than I remembered, the streets shabbier, the old plaster chipped and pockmarked. When I knocked on the apartment door, my mother clung to me as if I might disappear. She examined my clothes, soft linings, perfect seams, and shook her head. You wear your dreams. And I make them, I said, not quite able to meet her eyes. That evening the whole family crowded into the apartment. The kitchen was a chaos of voices and plates. My aunt eyed my suit critically, fingering the lapel without asking. Nice, she allowed, tailored well. Expensive fabric, Marco. I grinned, some say I know the designer. She laughed, but uncertainty flickered behind her smile. My father watched all this, his mouth a thin line, as if preparing for an argument. After dinner they began the old games, stories of youth, wine spilled, neighbors mocked. Then my mother brought out an old photo album, full of yellowing pages and the debris of days long past. Someone asked about Milan, what I did, who I knew. I tried to explain in simple words, unsure if they heard me. Finally, my cousin Giulio leaned back, knife scratching his teeth. We saw your name in a magazine once. But in Rome, nobody knows you. Only the big names matter here, Valentino Armani. The old humiliation prickled beneath my skin. Still, something inside me was steadier now, more anchored. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick, glossy magazine, Vogue Italia, on the cover not my name but my dress, a sweep of cobalt blue, worn by a model with the same defiant eyes I had drawn years before. I laid it in front of Giulio. He picked it up, turning it left and right. Nice picture. Look inside, I said, voice even. He did. There was a 2-page spread about my work, a description of my approach to color and cut. I watched his brow furrow as he read, lips moving silently. The table grew quiet. My father glanced at the headline. My aunt peered over his shoulder. Even Tommaso, now grown and dating Sylvia's middle daughter, stepped forward. No one spoke. I heard the tiny crack of a wine glass on the tabletop, my mother's breath held tight in her chest. It's you. My father's voice was rougher than I remembered, as if unused to softness. It's me, I nodded. I pulled my phone from my pocket, hands only trembling a little now, and showed them photos. A full collection worn on a stage far brighter than any Roman piazza. I clicked through images from backstage, shots of me with my team, fabric spread out like a sea behind me. My father's hand was rough when it closed around my shoulder. He said nothing, but he did not move away either. Will you make something for us? My mother whispered, eyes shining, for your father's birthday. I hesitated, then I stood heart-thumping as I pulled out a jacket, a simple thing but stitched with everything I'd learned, velvet lapels. Fine Italian wool, clean, purposeful lines. I handed it to my father. He slid his arm into the sleeve slowly, quietly. The fit was perfect, molding to shoulders broadened by years in the workshop. He flexed his fingers, tested the pockets. "It's good," he murmured, "very good." Giulio whistled, low and surprised. Aunt Margarita pressed her palm to her chest. The tension that had pressed against my lungs for years since that first humiliating critique eased. Not completely, maybe not ever, but enough. I breathed steady for the first time in years. Later that night, after the family had drifted home, my father found me in the cool darkness of the balcony. "You are still a craftsman," he said. "Just another kind." I turned to him, the night full of distant sirens and the sweet smell of olive trees. "Grazy, Papa." He squeezed my shoulder, and for the first time the gesture was neither warning nor command. We stood together as the city pulsed beneath us, the wounds between us not healed but open and clean. When I left Rome again, train bound for Milan, bag stuffed with new sketches, the hurt felt different. It was not rejection now, but the ache of a city that had shaped and scarred me and finally seen me become myself. As the tracks unspooled behind me and dawn touched the rooftops, I was at last complete, a craftsman, yes, and a dreamer still, but no longer afraid to be both.